Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and family, and everybody else, such a great pleasure to be with you today on the 7th episode of Season 4 of Real Talk with Billy and Cory, live from the Mars Center sound booth in Blacksburg, Virginia. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Hot Take Billy Parvatam on hand, joined by my podcast partner, Uncle Cornelius Michael. Some people call him Corey Van Dyke. Uncle, it's great to be back with you for number 7. As they say, this is March.
This is March indeed, of course. The phrase made famous by John Rothstein, a great follow on Twitter. And honestly, one of the best times of the year as a sports fan. Was thinking about it, honestly, the other day, what I think my favorite time of the year as a sports fan is. I'd probably say October is my favorite month. But I think that week in March, where a college basketball tournament first starts, March Madness, is the best sports week of the year. So really excited for all that's ahead, and we'll dive into a lot of that on the podcast today.
And of course, it's also the literally the last day before spring break. Blacksburg kind of feels a little empty right now. I was walking by. Honestly, since yesterday, it felt like a fair portion of the people left, and so yeah, it's a nice way to end spring break, or rather start spring break, going into spring break, starting officially tomorrow.
That's correct, and for all our viewers out there, me and Billy will be joining spring break together in Holston, Tennessee, where we'll be working together at a foster care, like school type situation there, developing relationships with the kids there, and it'll be just a great weekend great week all around. So looking forward to that as well over our spring break.
Also, we will be also joining us will be last week's guest, Shamar Parker, and unfortunately, I am riding in his car again to Holston. I think our leaders had some beef against me. That's why they put me in his car. So please be thinking of us. I got to ride in his car again. But it is redemption season for Shamar. But let's again talk about college basketball. Corey, you mentioned it. Everything coming together now before the March Madness tournament. You've got the last couple of days of the regular season. Sunday is going to be the last day of the regular season. And then a couple of days after that will be the start of the conference tournaments. In fact, actually, some conference tournaments have already started. The two biggest ones, of course, ACC, Big Ten, are still to come next week. But, Corey, what's your take on... because we're obviously a sports fan. We sports fans, we follow it pretty closely. What's your take on the whole situation? How do you view the conference tournaments? Or is it the opportunity where you can say, I'm looking at who can be some teams I think can go really deep in March Madness? Conference tournaments give you a good indication of that, or is it maybe a little bit too much overhyped for you in terms of success in March Madness? How do you kind of deal with that?
No, I think it is a pretty good indication of what a team's success will look like in the tournament to come. It's very often that you see, a team bounced out early in their conference tournament and then they go on to win the NCAA tournament. I think the best example we can think of a team that really rode off the success of their conference tournament was Kemba Walker and the UConn Huskies that year. I can't remember what exact year that was, but
it was 2011.
They won, I think, 4 or 5 straight games to win the Big East tournament, and then they go ahead and win the 6th straight to win the NCAA tournament. And that kind of shows how teams can use this conference tournament to ride momentum into the actual NCAA tournament. It gives teams better seeding, of course. If they win their tournament, they can get better matchups. So I think it is a really good indication of where we might look at some teams, and it's also, I think, a spot too where some of these smaller conferences to see if the teams that we could potentially see as bubble. To bust the bracket, as bubble teams, if they can, make a run and win their tournament. I think there's certain teams out there that we always keep our eye on. I know a team like Murray State or Belmont. That tournament's always one of the first ones. I think the Ohio Valley Conference they're both in. They're always, that team's going to be in there as a 12 or 13 seed. So it's also a place to look out for those types of teams in the smaller tournaments. Pick out maybe who you could think as a team that could bust your bracket and, get the advanced scouting on them, so to say.
And certainly for some of these conferences, I know the ACC has a down year this year, but we know in the past the ACC had, 7-8 teams going to the March Madness tournament, and so the ACC tournament was a good time to see them play in action beforehand. And you look at the Big Ten this year, you've got Wisconsin, Michigan State, Maryland, Illinois, Iowa, Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. All, of course, that's 8 teams if you counted that. All of them in the top 25. I think that's going to make for a very intriguing Big Ten tournament. And like you mentioned, I think you really have the opportunity to see how teams play. I think for me, one team that stood out, I think it was, I want to say 2015, Wisconsin, that team with Frank Kaminsky. You had Sam Decker as well as Nigel Hayes. I think that was a team I really watched them in the Big Ten tournament. I thought they had a really complete team. Remember, that was the team that the year before had lost to Kentucky in the Final Four. And I ended up picking, this was when I think it was my senior year in high school. I ended up, after watching them play in the Big Ten tournament, I said, this team is for real. I had them going to the final. And, of course, they beat Kentucky, who was undefeated that year, and ended up losing to Duke, but nonetheless made it all the way to tournament. So, I agree with you. I think it's a good opportunity to see not only some of these bubble teams, but, see if teams that are quote-unquote favorites, can they really, sustain success? Because people might say, it's just one game, a tournament, a 3-game, 4-game tournament, especially if you're one of these big seeds. Doesn't really matter for the March Madness tournament, but I think it does because you're playing a one-or-done situation against teams in your conference, teams that know you well. And I think if you can survive that, you've got a good shot against teams that don't know you as well come March Madness time. And keep in mind, I think, the conference champion is important. I know it very rarely happens. But I'm sure survive and advance. Great 30 for 30. I was just watching 30 for 30s last night. But that NC State team wasn't going to make the tournament, March Madness tournament, but they end up winning the ACC postseason tournament, and they get an automatic bid. So you never know if one of these teams might sneak up. Maybe Virginia Tech, I'm just joking. But I think it's going to be an interesting tournament to see. Are there, I know I mentioned the Big Ten, is that kind of the premier postseason tournament you're looking to? Or are you looking at some of these other conferences and you're saying that might be something to watch too?
I think the Big Ten is the one that immediately stands out because I think, looked at it, there's projected 11 teams from the Big Ten are projected to be in the tournament, the NCAA tournament as it stands right now. So you kind of want to get a look at all of those teams. And even this year in the Big Ten, no one team has really stood out, far above the rest of the competition there. You look at certain teams. Maryland has been leading the conference for most of the year, but then they've gone on a little bit of a losing streak, losing 3 of their last 4. Michigan State came in as the number 1 team preseason. They had a little downward stretch, but they've won 4 straight. So you look at them, those are the 2 teams that stand out immediately across the top. But the rest of it, it's a lot of teams that are kind of, you look at them, they're about even. A team like Michigan, a team like Ohio State, a team like Wisconsin, Illinois. All of those teams, they're really kind of equal in my mind. So I kind of want to see who stands out above that. And I'll tell you, the other tournament that I'm most looking forward to as well is the Big East tournament. I think, I'm going to go ahead and say it right now. I think one team, I haven't decided, who it is yet or anything. I think a team from the Big East will make the Final Four this year.
Whoa.
Some teams I think there's 3 teams that automatically stand out that you say that about. Seton Hall, Villanova, and Creighton are the 3 teams right now. And, you look at those 3 teams, Seton Hall is ranked number 8, Creighton is ranked number 11, and Villanova is ranked number 14. So you have 3 teams like that are kind of a little bit under the radar. I want to see how they do as well in their conference tournament. Yeah,
I'm really big on Seton Hall. I want to see how they do in the Big East. And I think, like you mentioned, they might be a team that I look at that could make the Final Four if they do well in their tournament. I'm also still intrigued by the ACC tournament. Yes, this is a down year for the conference, but again, you've got those 4 teams at the top: Florida State, Louisville, Duke, and Virginia. I think all of them have something to prove. First of all, as Hokie fans, you hate to say it, but you got to give props to the UVA in the sense of they were, looking like they might not make the tournament maybe a month ago, and all of a sudden they went on a big run. I think they've won 8 or 9 of their past. They've been on a big streak. 8 other than that last 9 games, or 8 in a row, something along those lines. And they're pretty firmly, I think, a tournament team, and I think it's a testament to Tony Bennett's coaching. And then I think you got a team like Duke, who, if you remember, they've been to the Elite 8 the last 3 years and have not advanced to the Final Four. I think this year, maybe we'll see. I mean, it seems like every 5 years they win a championship. 2010 beat Butler, 2015 beat Wisconsin, maybe 2020 is their year. And then you've got Louisville, who is led by Chris Mack. I think they're a team that I know I've liked. I think they've been high on your list. And then Florida State, a team that they feel like they've been elite in the ACC. Like they've been a top 10 team in America, but they haven't really been able to translate into deep postseason success for March Madness. So I'm interested to see what happens with Florida State. And then maybe if some of these teams like Syracuse and Georgia Tech, if they go on a deep run, they do have 10 wins in the ACC, which I don't think is going to do much, but you never know. And then I'm not even counting out a team like North Carolina. No, I mean, you're gonna hate me for saying that, but I mean, you never know. They got Cole Anthony. If you win the tournament, hey, that's an automatic bid. So you never know. But the one team I think I'm looking at, I know you mentioned a few teams, Michigan State. I said this, I think, a few weeks back on our podcast, but this is a team that went to the Final Four last year. They've got Cassius Winston, one of the best point guards in the country, and I think you probably agree with this statement, Corey. Guard play really takes you far in the NCAA tournament, and I think Tom Izzo has had a lot of success in March Madness. He's been known to bust up a few brackets. I've been at the receiving end of that a few times, good and bad. I remember the one year I picked them to win it all, and they lost to Middle Tennessee. So thank you, Michigan State, for that. But Michigan State is one team I'm looking at.
Yeah, and your talk about the ACC, when I think about the team I'm looking at the most from there, it's a team you mentioned that we both like, is Louisville. I think Louisville has the most talent of any team in the ACC. It's just a matter if all those pieces come together. Louisville, of course, they just beat the Hokies last Sunday night, going away in Akron. I think ended up a 16-point game, something like that. But they hit a little rough patch in the middle of the season where they lost at Clemson, they lost at Georgia Tech, two teams that are kind of in the middle to bottom of the ACC, and that's not really what you would expect from a team that you see as the potential to have a Final Four run, a potential national championship run even. So that's the team I'm most looking forward to in the ACC. Another team that I'll throw out there as well is Baylor. Baylor's a team I really want to watch. They were consensus number one for most of this season after going however many straight wins it was. They had their one loss early in the season to Washington and then went on a long stretch of, I think, 20-plus straight wins in a row. But just recently, they've lost to TCU, or they lost to Kansas, and then they lost a shocker to TCU, honestly. So I want to see them kind of rebound, see if they're real. Because I know, honestly, throughout most of the season, I was thinking, man, this is a team that I might like to pick to win it all just because of the way they play defense. I thought they were kind of this year's version of UVA, where they play stellar defense and get just enough from their offense. So Baylor's another team that I'm really looking forward to in their conference tournament.
And you did mention one of those teams, Kansas, a team that knocked off Baylor at home. I think at the time Baylor was number 3. Baylor was number 1 and Kansas was number 3. What are your thoughts on the Wildcats? I mean, they're another team that, of course, is coached by Bill Self, Hall of Fame coach, championship coach. What are your thoughts on them? Do you think they could make a run in March Madness?
The Jayhawks.
The Jayhawks. I don't know why I said the Wildcats. They are wild. They play so wild, I call them the Wildcats.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you look at it right now, I think Kansas is the most complete team. They have stellar guard play with Devin Dotson as their point guard. He was a guy that many expected to go to the draft after his freshman year. He's back, and then they have the big man down low, 7-foot center, Adoku Azubuike. He's just a load down low. He's gotten physically stronger this year, lost a few pounds, but gotten stronger in the process. And that's really kind of been a difference for Kansas this year. And they're playing elite defense like they always do. So I think right now they're the number one team, so they're the favorite, obviously. So and like I said, I think the most complete team of any in the tournament. They've won 15 straight even right now. So that's another team we'll be monitoring. And, Bill Self, he's always had teams that have gone gone deep into the postseason. So I don't expect that to be any different this year with Kansas. I'm going to bring up another team to you. Want to get your thoughts on them, is Dayton. What do you think about Dayton, Obi Toppin, and the Flyers?
Well, Dayton, as they beat Virginia Tech, which at the time was a good win, but obviously now that's not saying much. But I don't know. I've always been kind of weary of some of these schools that might not necessarily play a stronger competition, just because I think, especially in a conference tournament, like if you're playing a lot of good competition, like whoever wins the Big Ten tournament will play. I certainly think that prepares you well for the March Madness tournament. Now, again, it's one game, but I've always even though it seems like a lot of times in terms of these Cinderella stories, you get the Loyola Chicagos or George Masons from back in the day, or VCU that can be from a smaller school playing a lesser known conference and go on a big run. I think more often than not, the schools that play in sort of these big-time college basketball conferences end up, I think, if you're going to be a betting man, which I know both of us are to some extent, maybe a huge extent, I think those are the teams that you roll with March Madness. So what about you? What are your thoughts on Dayton?
Honestly, I think Dayton, you think about them, and the three teams they kind of get grouped with is Gonzaga, Dayton, and San Diego State. Those are 3 top 5 teams this year that don't come from major college basketball conferences. And out of those 3, I like Dayton the most. They're ranked number 3 right now. Gonzaga is number 2, and San Diego State is number 5. But I've had the chance to watch Dayton a little more than the other 2 teams. I've seen Gonzaga a lot, but they haven't really impressed me, particularly because of their guard play. And San Diego State, it just feels like they've kind of lost their touch a little bit. They're playing in close games now down the stretch, whereas before they were blowing out opponents. But Dayton, I think you look at them, and it extends just beyond Obi Toppin. Obi Toppin is the guy that gets all the praise, all the credit for them because he's going to be a lottery pick in the upcoming draft this year. But really, it's far beyond them. You have a guy like Jalen Crutcher who has really become their clutch player even down the stretch. He's had a couple game-winning shots this year. Had a game-winning shot, or a game-tying shot to send the game into overtime in that Maui championship against Kansas. Kansas eventually beat Dayton in overtime. So even that, shows you that this Dayton team is for real if they're going to overtime with Kansas at the beginning of the season. I really like Dayton. Anthony Grant, former VCU coach, so got to see him a couple times growing up and stuff like that. Dayton is his alma mater. It's really the place where this is kind of the team that he's been building up for. So I'm going to look for the Flyers to see what they look like going into the tournament. They haven't lost a conference game so far this year, and I expect that to kind of continue even throughout the conference tournament as well.
I'm also interested to see how Gonzaga does. I mean, this is a team, they're 29-2, like you mentioned, a top 5 team, led by Mark Few, another guy who I think most people would agree is a pretty good coach, if not elite. Looks like Harrison Ford. I think Harrison Ford should play him in a movie. But that's beside the point. But this is a team that, they kind of remind you of Wichita State from a few years ago. That team that was accomplished. They kept getting, Sweet 16, Elite 8 in the tournament. And I think Gonzaga got to the championship a few years back and lost to Carolina. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how they do in the tournament. I mean, are they going to be able to go on one of these deep runs, get over the hump, so to speak? But looking at their schedule, though, I mean, sure, they've got wins against Washington and Arizona, but a lot of their, I think there's always a stigma against the Pac-12 for some reason, whether it's football and maybe basketball. There's not as much to a lesser extent, but they got crushed by Michigan 82-64, and lost to BYU, who is not on many people's radars. I mean, I know they were ranked at the time, but it just they're not a team that people are really looking at. And they beat North Carolina, which I know you agree is not saying much. Virginia Tech beat North Carolina, so that's not saying much. But what are your thoughts on Gonzaga? Do you think they have what it takes to get over the hump this season?
I mean, honestly, I don't, because I've gotten the chance to see them a few times recently, and like I mentioned before, I'm just not impressed by their guard play at all. I think in years past, the thing about Gonzaga is they've always had good big men. Even last year they had Rui Hachimura and Brandon Clark, who both ended up being picks in the first round this past year. And the thing that kind of held them back was their guard play. They had Josh Perkins as their point guard. He was more of a shoot-first guy, and Zach Norvell, who was kind of a guy that just kind of put up shots when you had these 2 guys down low that you didn't go to. And I think it's more of the same this year, where you have 2 international guys, I believe. Killian Tilly is their power forward, and then Filip Petrusev is their center, and 2 guys that are arguably the most talented people on their team, but yet it's the guards that are making all the moves going down the stretch. And like we've always said, you mentioned it before, good guard play is what wins in March, and I just don't see that with the Zags right now.
All right, so we've had a good discussion on the lead up to March Madness. I want you, and I will do it too, put our money where our mouth is and pick predict who's going to be in the Final Four. Now, obviously, I know later on you'd have to take into account seeding. Maybe these teams might be in the same region. So taking that all out of consideration, if you had to pick your Final Four right now, who is it going to be? You can go hot takes, you can go safe picks, but I'm going to let you take the floor first. Who you got in your Final Four right now today, whatever the date is, March 6th, 2020?
March 6th, 2020. Like you said, it's kind of hard when you don't know all the seedings left and that type of thing. But this year has been super crazy, so I'm going to throw a few different picks out there as well. I think Dayton. I like Dayton a lot. I like the Flyers to get to the Final Four. I'll say Kentucky.
Whoa. Two for two hot takes.
That's a team we didn't talk about yet. Kentucky, I think they shocked me this past week in their weekday game when they lost to Tennessee after being up. But I really like it goes back to guard play. They have 3 guys on the court who are all virtually point guards, plus a big man down low like Nick Richards. I like Kentucky a lot. I think one of the Big 12 teams, I don't know if that's Baylor or Kansas. I'm going to say Baylor right now. I think Kansas is the better team, but with how this season shakes out, I'll say Baylor. I think the Bears get it done. They go on a run and make it to the Final Four. And then, I said it earlier, I have to pick a Big East team, right? So let's go with Seton Hall. The Pirates, they have, I think, arguably the most talent on their team. It's just a fact that if they can all put it together, Miles Powell is obviously one of the most talented players in America, but also a high-volume scorer, a guy that's taken a lot of shots during the game. And if he gets hot, though, kind of like we saw Carson Edwards with Purdue last year, I think that's very comparable guy to look at. I think he could put the Pirates on a run into the Final Four.
So just to recap, you've got Seton Hall, Dayton, Baylor, and Kentucky. Okay, it's not bad. I might shock you a little bit with my picks too. So I actually agree with one of your picks. I'm gonna also pick Seton Hall to go to the Final Four. I think they're the strongest Big East team. I'm really gonna shock you with these picks. I'm gonna go 2 teams from the ACC. I'm gonna go with Louisville. I think they're the most talented team in the ACC, and I'm gonna go with the Duke Blue Devils. Will be another team that I think goes on a deep run. Coach K. He's going to find a way to lead his team through March Madness. Although I think that's a discussion we can get into later about, some of these elite coaches, quote unquote, are they better recruiters than coaches? I know that arguments may have been made about John Calipari, but I think you could certainly look to Coach K, at least recent success or lack thereof, and say he might be in that category too. So I'm going Louisville, Duke, Seton Hall, and Michigan State will be my Big Ten team that makes it out of the Big Ten. I had to go with the Big Ten team considering how stacked they are. I said it a few weeks ago when Chris Finch, or it might have been David Cunningham when David Cunningham was on the show. And I think, like I said, March Tom Izzo, and Cassius Winston are going to get the job done. I'm going Michigan State, Seton Hall, Louisville, and Duke. Well, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Honestly, though, the pick that I disagree with the most is Duke. I just don't see it this year with them. When you have guys like Zion and R.J. Barrett last year and you can't get to the Final Four, I think the freshmen that they have this year are a lot. I mean, Vernon Carey, he's been a great player, but other than him, no one has really stood out. Trey Jones is obviously a great point guard, but I don't see it with Duke this year. So how about this too? What is one sleeper team? Maybe you even had it with Michigan State, but maybe another team that you think could go further in the tournament that not a lot of people are talking about. I'll go first. I think it's even a team that you brought up, BYU. You look at the Cougars this year. They've won 7 straight. They're 15th or 9 straight. Excuse me. They're 15th ranked in the poll right now. No one's talking about them. They killed Gonzaga a couple weeks ago. I think it was a 17-point win, something along those lines. And really, they've been a different team ever since they got their power forward, Yuli Childs, back. This is a guy that watched him a few times. He's an absolute beast down low. He can step out and hit some threes, too. BYU, of course, they beat the Hokies earlier this year in Maui, too. That's another team that was out there. And they are a team that relies on three-pointers a lot, which it kind of gives me a little worries because that can be either a good thing or a bad thing, really, if they're not falling. But I think they're a team to watch out for that no one's really talking about right now. That could be a surprise Final Four contender.
Again, you might be shocked by this pick.
Don't say UNC.
No, I will not say UNC, but I think a lot of people around these parts will hate me for this. I'm going with the Virginia Cavaliers could be a sleeper team because you look at, like I said, where they were a month ago. We thought they might not even make the tournament to winning 8 of 9 going on a big streak. We're winning streak right now. I just think, look, we've seen Tony Bennett get the job done. He's an elite coach, a champion. This is of course, the defending champion. I think it's going to be a little bit, that's going to wear on them a little bit because they are the defending champion. They've got they've got what everybody wants. But I think this is a team that, again, you look at some of these names in the ACC: Florida State, Louisville, Duke. You almost think Virginia is an afterthought, even though in their own conference. I think, again, considering they don't have any pressure, being the national champion, of course, but slightly overlooked. Again, your term was sleeper. I think I'm going with UV. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, what have they won now? Seven straight, and I think 8 of their last 9, and they're a team really that, don't have a lot of offense, but they're playing that elite defense and just finding ways to win. I think it was David Teal, of course, great reporter in the Commonwealth here. He tweeted out the other day that in their past 6 wins, it's been by a combined 13 points. So they're finding ways to win, and that's what it comes down to in March. I think that luck will catch up to them eventually. I feel like it has to at some point. But if they, they're a battle-tested team that, like you said, knows how to kind of win those close games, grind out wins. So I like that pick. Another team too that I'll throw out there, and since I didn't throw out any teams from the Big Ten, I'll say Michigan. I like the Wolverines. They're always a team that seems to come into form. Of course, it's been under John Beilein in the most recent years, but this year with Juwan Howard. But they're always a team that seems to be playing their best basketball when it comes around in March. Even the past couple of years, they were, 2 years ago in the national championship against Villanova. So I think they're ranked 25th right now. I'd watch out for the Wolverines. Xavier Simpson leading the charge for them as point guard, and a couple of big men down low in Teskey that I think, look out for the Wolverines as a team right now that, doesn't 19-11 doesn't really, not really on a lot of people's radar.
Of course, shout out to John Beilein, left Michigan for the Cavaliers, and we know how that worked out. Before we kind of transition away, what do you think about Florida State? They're a team we haven't really talked about, being that we're an ACC school. You, of course, were at the Florida State game when Tech, no shockingly, lost to Florida State. What are your thoughts on them? We feel like we haven't talked about them, but they are ranked number 7 in the country.
Yeah, I think Leonard Hamilton is one of the most underrated coaches in America. Every year, the past however many years it's been, the Seminoles are a top 25 team. They're one of the deepest teams in America. They play 11 to 12 guys every year. They always have 2 twin towers down low, it seems like 7-foot guys. And yet no one talks about the job that Leonard Hamilton does. I think he should be ACC Coach of the Year this year. You look at it this past year, they lost some key pieces from their team that went to the Sweet 16 last year, and they picked up right where they left off. And I think this is another team. They were in the Elite 8 2 years ago. We're in the Sweet 16 this past year. I would expect a similar run to that. I think a Sweet 16 Elite 8 run is in the works for Florida State. But they're kind of another team, too, that plays a lot of close games. They don't really blow out many teams. So I think that's, like UVA, that's something that you feel like that luck has to kind of run out eventually. Of course, even just this past week, they beat Notre Dame by 2 on a game-winning bucket, and they won that game by leading only 19 seconds the entire game. That's just kind of the team Florida State is. But, hey, it's worked out in the past, so I don't see why it can't work out going forward this year.
Another good discussion on March Madness. We'll see what happens, of course. By the time we come back, I believe when we come back is Selection Sunday, right?
Yeah, so it'll be the next podcast will be full bracket breakdown, and looking forward to that.
For sure. And, March Madness, one of the best times of the year, and we will see what ends up happening in this madness. This is March, as Cory has mentioned multiple times on this podcast. It's even on his phone. That's how much he loves that saying as his wallpaper. But, Cory, let's transition now to Virginia Tech basketball. The season, regular season, almost complete. They'll have one more game in the regular season at Notre Dame. Of course, this was Mike Young's first year. I think it's safe to say Tech fans a little bit spoiled from the past 3 years, having made the NCAA tournament under Buzz Williams. But nonetheless, Mike Young guaranteed a over 500 finish in his first regular season as a member of the Virginia Tech Hokies. 16-14, 7-12 in the conference. Cory, this is a team that I think had 5 wins early on in the conference schedule, and I think a lot of people were very excited. Maybe a little bit too much expectations placed. People thought they might be able to make another tournament run, but ultimately you just saw the youth catch up to this team against some of these elite teams like a Florida State, a UVA, a Duke, Louisville. You just saw that Hokies are going to need some time to catch up to those programs, but nonetheless, a very exciting season. I think at times, under Mike Young, of course, we've talked about at length how much easier he is to work with as a member of the media. But even on the court, he's just been representing the Hokies with class. And I think all in all, even though we're not talking tournament this year at Virginia Tech, you still have to appreciate the work Mike Young and his staff have done in his first season.
Yeah, exactly. And if you would have told me at the beginning of the season that the Hokies could finish this year 8-12 in the ACC, I would have said you're crazy that they don't have the talent on their roster to win maybe 3 or 4 games in the ACC. But I think it is a testament to the way that Mike Young has these guys playing. It's a testament to the way that some of these freshmen have really developed into go-to weapons down the stretch. You look at a guy like Tyrese Radford that I think no one even knew who this guy really even was coming into the season, and now he's really been a guy that's rounded into form. When a guy like Landers Nolley, who was the main weapon at the beginning of the season, has really taken a turn the other direction where he's really kind of fallen off this year. It's really been Radford who's coming on strong. A guy like Jalen Cone, where many people expected him coming into this year to play that role as backup point guard, really not get a whole lot of minutes. He's really become a key contributor for this team. I think you look at him, I'm most excited about his future and just the way that, he's, I think, close to a 50% three-point shooter this year, and a lot of attempts. It's not just, 1 or 2 attempts a game. So I'm really excited about his future and just everyone in general. It really looks like a team that when all those pieces come together, when they get a little more height. I know that's what Mike Young was talking about. He needs more height on this team for some of the things that he wants to do. This is a team that, 2-3 years from now, they'll be right back, I think, where Buzz had this team, last year and the year before, where they're a team, 4 for 5th or 6th in the ACC.
I agree with you. I mean, it's. I think it was. I think there weren't the Hokies predicted to finish like 13th or 14th.
14th out of 15th they were projected
in the conference, and to say they're gonna finish very least 16 and 15, I think that's a pretty remarkable record. 12-6 at home, so I know some of those games might have been non-conference games they should have won, but nonetheless, I mean, hey, you win 12 games at home, more than double your wins over your losses. I think that's always a good way to keep drawing fans out. And look at some of these wins. I mean, Michigan State, we're talking about them making the tournament. Hokies early on in the season won 71-66. Really wish Michigan was a bubble. Michigan State rather was a bubble team, so then they could say, "Well, you lost to Virginia Tech, you're not in the tournament." That would have been more funny. But and I think you just look at it. I mean, even against some of the teams that were not as good in the ACC, you just saw this youth catch up, lose to Dayton, a team you picked to go in the Final Four. Of course, they're not in the ACC, but nonetheless, a team that's going to go far. Duke pretty much blew out Virginia Tech, blew them out of the building last both times. I think, is it true? I think it might have been at halftime of the UVA game. I know the Hokies did come back and tie it and ultimately lost, but I think the Hokies only scored like 11 points or something.
11 at the half, yeah, so, and then 42 in the second half. So.
Yeah, you saw this youth catch up with this Hokies team, but nonetheless, I think a lot of good points. Landers Nolley, he's only going to get better. Some of these young guys. And by the way, let's give Mike Young credit because I believe, wasn't Landers Nolley a Buzz Williams recruit?
He was, yeah, so he got him to stay. He was, of course, in the transfer portal once Buzz left and got him to come back. Same thing with Obisa Beatty. He was obviously a Buzz Williams recruit, and he got him to come back after he entered the transfer portal. And so, I mean, 2 big moves, even right there, that if they don't come back, this Virginia Tech team is looking at a far worse season than it ended up being. So credit to Mike Young for that as well.
And I know you kind of touched on it, but because, I know as college basketball fans, but as Virginia Tech fans too, we want to always talk about when can this team make it back to the NCAA tournament and be among the most talked about programs again. What's the timeline for that, you think? When do you think realistically we could see a team that makes it back to the NCAA tournament, especially when you take into account they overperformed expectations this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think even you look as close as next year, I think they're a team that will be, kind of like what NC State has been this year, like on the bubble the entire year. They're a team that could certainly be in that range where, you look at them right now, they're 16 and 15. Say it's just a 3-bump improvement. Say they're 19 and 15 or something like that. That's a team that could be on the bubble. Maybe even you probably have to do a little better than that. That would be 19 and 11, something along those lines. So, I think that's kind of where we're looking at next year. And then I think year 3 of Mike Young is really when you can expect a tournament team. And then I think, year 4, you're looking at kind of what we saw with Buzz this past year and the year before, where a team that, looking to make a Sweet 16 run, looking to make a successful run just in the postseason. So I think that's kind of the timeline right now. Of course, all of that can change, with different injuries, with guys coming and going and different things like that. But I think on the outside looking in, that's where I kind of would see this timeline progressing with Mike Young.
Yeah, if you look at how Buzz Williams fared in his time here at Virginia Tech, his first season, 2-16, I think it was in the ACC, which is obviously not good, and almost lost every game. And so you look at this season, Mike Young, of course, way improved over that. Second season was my freshman year. They went 10-8 in the ACC, but had a couple of really bad out-of-conference losses that prevented them from making the tournament. Then you look at my sophomore year, your freshman year, end up making it to the tournament for the first time with another 10-8 record. And then after that, I think it like you said, culminated in the Hokies making a Sweet 16. Ahmed Hill should have made that tip. Could have gone to overtime. Although, let's be honest, I've admitted, I don't know if you ever agree with this, Corey. I would have been really hard to believe that Hokies would have won that game in overtime, considering Blackshear was already at 4 fouls. First play overtime, he was going to foul out. But nonetheless, I think that is still something I see in my nightmares, because he knew at least we had a shot. But maybe, I don't know what your thoughts on it. Maybe, for me, it's always been a little bit better in the sense that even if he had made it, it would have been tied. It wasn't for the win, and there's no guarantee that we would have won in overtime.
Then, yeah, because, I mean, even the possession before that, they tried to hit Ty Outlaw for the three-pointer for the win, and that gets deflected out of bounds after he misses it, and then they do that play to end. So, Buzz Williams even wanted to go for the win right there before that. But, yeah, I mean, I think it would definitely have been difficult to beat the Blue Devils in overtime with Zion really at his top form, then coming back from injury and all different things that went along with that. So I agree with that.
Good discussion on Virginia Tech basketball, and, of course, we hope a March Madness appearance is returning back to Blacksburg sooner rather than later. Let's transition now to the close of our podcast. And Corey, I want to do something fun a little bit because it's the last episode before spring break. I wanted to talk about 30 for 30s. I know you're a big fan of them. I'm a big fan of them. Of course, ESPN has been producing them for a while now. I don't know exactly when they started, but they've got, I think it's like up to 3 or 4 volumes now of 30 for 30s. First of all, what's kind of your take on all those 30 for 30s? I think it's great that they focus in on so many different storylines, and I don't know if it's obscure is the right word, but definitely even storylines that might not necessarily jump out to you, kind of like Catholics versus convicts, Notre Dame and Miami, or even some of these 30 for 30 shorts like the Arnold Palmer, how the Arnold Palmer was made. I'm a little biased because that's my favorite drink. I know it's yours too, but here's my question for you. If you could only pick one 30 for 30, if you were on a stranded island, if you were in Holston, Tennessee, which you will be tomorrow, and you had the only access you had to Wi-Fi, the only thing you were allowed to do is watch one 30 for 30, what would you pick?
It would be the one on Steve Bartman, Catching Hell, Whoa. I think is the name of it. That is my all-time favorite 30 for 30. It's one of the more fascinating, you think about what goes on, between the lines normally, and that's the things that are talked about. But that's really the one where it's what happened outside the lines. It's what happened, in the stands right there. Steve Bartman, of course, reaches over. Moises Alou gets upset with him, saying he interfered with him from catching the ball in foul territory. The Marlins then go on to score a bunch of runs in a row, and Steve Bartman kind of becomes the bad goat in. The scapegoat, I guess you can say.
The curse of the Billy Goats.
Exactly. In Chicago, they don't win the World Series that year after having one of their best teams of all time. They had guys like Kerry Wood, Mark Pryor at the top of their rotation. The Marlins end up going to the World Series instead of them. That's, I think, one of the more fascinating things because Steve Bartman, he had to, he couldn't, show his face in Chicago after that. His life was ruined, like you said, and I think that documentary did a great job of showing the impact of that, in that moment. It even had fans' perspective from inside the stadium at that time people dumping beer on him as he's getting escorted out of the stadium. It interviewed the security guard that was in the closed doors behind the room with him afterwards, and she's saying that he's crying and all this kind of stuff going on, that he was distraught after it all. I even think, too, that I don't think Moises Alou had a chance of catching it. I don't think Steve Bartman's interference had anything to do with it. But I think that's just one of the more fascinating ones that, it kind of captures all the different emotions of the game, of sports, of fans, and really, I think the true human emotions are involved in that one. So that would be the one that I would choose.
Can I also say, for the record, we really missed out in 2003 because if you remember, both the Cubs and the Red Sox were in their respective league championship series. Both had long streaks. The Cubs with the curse of the Billy Goat, the Red Sox with the curse of the Bambino. You mentioned how the Cubs lost. The Red Sox lost on a walk-off home run by Aaron Boone in Game 7. We could have seen Cubs and Red Sox in 2003. One team breaks that legendary streak. Of course, now, since then, both of them have broken their streaks. For me, I'm going to go with a topic we just talked about, March Madness, Survive and Advance. NC State's incredible run over the world of college basketball, ended up beating Houston that had Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler in the championship. I just love the stories. Jim Valvano, such a great personality. We all know the ESPY speech he gave when he was battling cancer. They talk about how he would have one practice every year where they would practice cutting down the nets because he was practicing winning the championship. And one specific story I really like is when they talk about, we just talked about these conference tournaments. The ACC tournament they played the ACC tournament that they played that year, they played North Carolina that had what many consider the greatest player of all time, Michael Jordan. And that was a back and forth game. And I think it's interesting, Corey. You think about how basketball was played back then. Back then there was no shot clock. I mean, as a team, you could literally, run out, just hold the ball if you could for 3 minutes and kind of run out the clock essentially. And Valvano had this idea of intentionally fouling guys so that they would miss free throws so they could stop the clock because there was no shot clock. And I remember that game, Sam Perkins, who was another great NBA player, essentially barely his game-winning attempt was like in and out. And they talk about how if he had made that shot, none of that would have ever happened. And instead, they say sports is a game of inches. It doesn't go in, and NC State ends up winning the whole tournament. And then also the fact that, shout out to UVA, they did beat UVA twice, I believe, during that run. Once in the ACC tournament final as well as in the Elite Eight. And UVA, of course, had Ralph Sampson at the time. So I'm going to go with Survive and Advance as mine. But, of course, there's so many great ones. How about this question for you? If you, because I'm sure you haven't watched every one, if there's one you could watch that you have not seen, what would you pick?
It's a good question. I was just actually had the list pulled up of looking at some of them and different things like that. I think an interesting one, because it's a sport that I don't normally follow. It's a sport that we're not, accustomed to looking at on a daily basis, is boxing, and I think the one is 42-1, where it's Buster Douglas's knockout of then undefeated Mike Tyson. I think that's one that I look at, and then going along with that same theme of boxing is No Mas, where there's that kind of that controversy of what happened in the ring. Did he actually yell out No Mas? Did he not? That's kind of one I think that there's, I don't know, you look at it and it's just an inside look at the two fighters that were in there, Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran. So I think those two that I think I kind of initially wasn't super interested because it is boxing. And like I said, it's a sport that we don't normally watch. It's not one that immediately stuck out right away like a one like Survive and Advance would or the Steve Bartman one would. So I think those are two that maybe, get a little time on my hands this summer, might go back and look at.
I'm going to go with the Lakers-Celtics 30 for 30, which, by the way, I did start watching last night at your house. You were not there. For other reasons, I won't go into why he was not there. You guys other obligations. But anyway, because I just think that whole rivalry, now, again, it focuses on the rivalry of the 60s. But for me, what's intriguing is when it really picked up in the 80s when you had Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. They talk about how the NBA was on tape delay, and these guys literally saved the NBA because I think the Lakers and the Celtics combined for like 5, 6, 7 championships in the 1980s. And I think it was 8 championships, yeah, because the Lakers won 5 and the Celtics won 3. And, it just, I think, really transcended sports because you had the Lakers, Showtime Lakers versus the Celtics, the flash and dash and the blue collar sort of feel of Boston. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, black versus white. I mean, there were so many stories, and I know NBA players like Charles Barkley talk about the fact that rivalry literally saved the NBA because it was on tape delay at the time. And now you look at today, how do you say it nicely? Average players are getting paid a lot of money. Like Mike Conley, and he's not average, but he got paid $153 million, which we all know he probably shouldn't. But of course now the market's raised. So I think Lakers Celtics would be one that I would like to see. I know both of us saw the Michael Vick documentary when it came out, I think about a month ago, and I think that was really cool, Corey, to not only see the story of Michael Vick, but see how Virginia Tech played a part in that. It was not like they focused a big part of that, but I think certainly for football players, I think recruiting, that Vick documentary really helped in promoting Virginia Tech.
Yeah, for sure, and it showed, all of Michael Vick's rise and how it really, obviously started in high school before that, but it really became on a national scene in college at Virginia Tech, and, showing scenes of Michael Vick, walking in Blacksburg and different things like that. That's going to do nothing but increase the brand, nothing but increase people's awareness of Virginia Tech. So like you said, it does, I think, provide a boost for recruiting. And I really enjoyed, it was a 2-part documentary. I think the writers or the producers did a good job of really telling his story, I think fairly too. It wasn't, I don't think overly harsh on him, or it definitely gave him his spotlight to kind of give his side of the story as well and everything. And I know a lot of things in the past have kind of looked down on Vic, but it really, I think did show his kind of redemption story and where he's at now and what he's doing. So I greatly enjoyed the Vic documentary. I don't know about you.
Yeah, for sure. I think it was great. One thing I wanted to ask you, because we both watched the Aaron Hernandez documentary, which I believe was on HBO, Netflix. Yeah. And HBO is another streaming service that has a lot of these great sports documentaries. Even Hulu, I don't know if they necessarily do sports, but they're another avenue for that. Do you still think ESPN and the 30 for 30s, with all of these different platforms coming out now, do you still believe that 30 for 30s are sort of the premier platform for some of these sports documentaries?
I mean, I think so. I mean, you look at ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports, and it should be in the film industry too for all these 30 for 30s and even the ESPN films. So I think it should, and it still is the premier platform where we're seeing all these different things come out. So yeah.
And I think this is a really interesting question for debate. If you could pick a story that they have not done and turn that into a 30 for 30, where would you go with that? I've got one if you want to take a second to think of it. I think you know where I'm going to go with this. But the Washington Nationals run to the World Series this past year, even you got to admit, was a pretty remarkable run. I mean, you look at this team starting at 19-31 on May 24th, 2019, not that I remember, but ended up coming back, and then you look at the run that they had, 5 elimination games, trailed in all 5, ended up coming back. They beat the NL Reliever of the Year, Josh Hader, beat Hall of Fame pitchers like Clayton Kershaw and Justin Verlander. A guy like Garrett Cole ends up going $300 million in the offseason with the Yankees. You look at the teams they beat, 106-win Dodgers and 107-win Astros, and the NL Central winning Cardinals in the span of it. Winning the first team to win 4 games to win a World Series, especially with the impact of that World Series now and all that's happened with the Astros, the scandal. Stealing sign scandal. I don't know if they've got a gate scandal with it, name with it, but I just think even if you look at what's happening off the field, I mean, if the Nats had not won that World Series, you could have made a legitimate argument that 2 out of the last 3 world champions, of course, the same team, the Houston Astros, were illegitimate titles. I think the Nationals, I don't know if saved baseball is the right term, but they certainly, I think, helped steer away questions that people would have had about the legitimacy of another world championship team. It's good that it only stays with one team, but that's kind of my thoughts on that. I don't know what your thoughts were on that. I know I'm a little biased, but I think it would make for a great story.
No, I think it would be a good one, and you kind of mentioned it right there. It would probably be something that would have to be a long time from now. But even on the sign-stealing scandal, what would a 30 for 30 look like on that? I think that's one thing. But when you initially asked that question, the one thing that came to my mind, and I've heard people talk about this before, is that team, the Florida Gators football team, and all the different personalities that they had on that team what would a 30 for 30 look like on that when you have Tim Tebow as their quarterback, Urban Meyer as their head coach, Aaron Hernandez as their tight end, Riley Cooper as their wide receiver, the Pouncey brothers on that team, Brandon Spikes, another guy who's had legal troubles in the NFL, all these different personalities, and how did that team mesh together and win a national championship? I think that's one of the more, interesting and compelling stories that I think would be eye-opening, to say the least, to take a look at. When you look at, you have guys like Tim Tebow who have some of the more positive characters in I think professional sports, and then you have guys like Aaron Hernandez, obviously, who becomes a murderer and kills himself in prison. Just like the dichotomy in that, and Urban Meyer, he's of course become under criticism after his stint at Ohio State, where the sexual assault allegations with Zach Smith and how he was at the head of all of that. I think that would be a very compelling story to kind of look at the dynamic of that team and how they even went on to win a national championship.
I also think one that, again, it's fairly recent, but I think because it shook the sports world, would be the passing of Kobe Bryant. Yeah. And I think just, and I'm sure they probably have footage somewhere, but I think just kind of one that details his life. I know recently we had the public funeral where a lot of people like Shaq and Gino Auriemma spoke, and Rob Pelinka, Michael Jordan, were very, very touching speech. I think that would be an interesting one, especially because you think about it, we probably haven't had, especially in the sports world, an event like that, tragic event like that happen. Because, you were a Kobe fan, I'm a Kobe fan. Just it seemed like because he was so invincible, and he was only 41, but it wasn't even like the fact that he had health problems or anything. I mean, this is a guy who worked out every day, had that Mamba mentality, quote unquote. So I think that's something that definitely they should look at in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even further into that is looking at Giovanna's basketball career as a focal part of that too, because I know there's people out there that are saying she was going to be the next star of the WNBA, and just kind of what was lost there I think would be a cool added touch to that. Because we have all the highlights of Kobe and everything like that, but what would you can find highlights online of Giovanna, but what would all of that look like as well, and people's different opinions on that. So,
nonetheless, though, I think we can both agree sports documentaries, I think they have a ability to not only make a lot of money, but just be really popular, and especially the fans. I would say you're wearing a Giants gear. I think looking at that, 3 World Series in 5 years, yeah. Madison Bumgarner's postseason runs, that might be something too. I think anytime you have a dynasty, the Heat, the Warriors, I think there's a lot of good topics, say 25, 30 years from now, we're going to really look at it and say, you know what, we've got some good footage, good stories to put together for a documentary.
Yeah, I'd love to see a little documentary on Mad Bum's run in that 2014 World Series, just how incredible that is, and maybe even something, even just a documentary on him too. I don't know if you saw the recent, I don't know what you want to call it, exposure that Madison Bumgarner was winning, lots of money on the rodeo circuit. He had this secret identity out there that he was going by the name of Mason Saunders, and won, these like different rodeo competitions out there. And someone posted his video online, or posted a picture of him winning online, and they were like, "That's not Mason Saunders, that's Madison Bumgarner." So Giants reporters talked to him about it, and or Diamondbacks and Giants reporters talked to him about it, and he kind of fessed up. So I think even something like that would be pretty cool too, that not a lot of people know about. But of course, I'm biased as a Madison Bumgarner Giants fan, and not sure that would have the large reaching appeal that some other stories might have.
Yeah, for sure. And sounds like Madison Bumgarner also has a burner account, kind of like Kevin Durant. Maybe in a more positive sense.
A real-life burner account.
Yeah, for sure. But nonetheless, a good discussion on 30 for 30s. And yet another good podcast, Corey. We previewed for some of for our viewers some of the teams to watch out for come March Madness time. And, of course, a good discussion on 30 for 30s, the GOAT in terms of sports documentaries. And, looking forward after spring break to seeing what happens with March Madness. Baseball is also less than I think 3 weeks away now. Opening
March
day.
26th, opening day.
And so Nats begin their title defense. Again, like I get to say, they're the defending champions all season long. But nonetheless, like you mentioned, I think this is one of the best times of the year for sports, and we look forward to what's coming up next.
That's right, and I know we'll have a great week this week during our spring break, and can't wait to come back and see this bracket that is revealed on Selection Sunday, and we can't wait to talk about that with our viewers later on about our picks. Some hot takes will certainly be thrown in there, and then we can enjoy some of the best weeks ahead in March for college basketball.
And it's also your swan song, your final stretch of college.
Yeah, it's crazy. I was just talking about that today with a couple of my buddies, that it's already, March. We have less than, or a little over, I guess, 2 months left before we graduate. So unreal to think about that, and just enjoying every moment still that I have left here at Virginia Tech.
For sure. And of course, like I mentioned, I'm going to be riding in Shamar's car again, so appreciate you guys could be thinking about that. But nonetheless, another great episode of Real Talk with Billy and Cory, Season 4, Episode 7. Got a lot to talk about and a lot to look forward to as sports fans. For my podcast partner, Uncle Cornelius Michael, Cory Van Dyke, I'm Hot Take Billy Parvatam on hand. We say so long to you for just a while. Have a great spring break, everybody. We'll see you next time. Love you 2000.